This is Pat's Probe on the Ourlads Football Network as the New England Patriots remain in the playoff race, whether Patriot fans like it or not. And they have moved to 6-6, 10th seed in the AFC, but still with a shot, especially if you put a bullseye on the team that the Patriots will be playing a week from Thursday, the Miami Dolphins, who take on the defending world champs on Sunday, Kansas City. So there's still a lot of hope. I guess the question, though, is, Jan, as we kind of talked and touched up on last week, is that what Patriot fans want?
It's a good question, and I think it's funny. We've seen on our videos and stuff like that on CLNS sort of the narrative shift a little bit here in the last couple of weeks for Patriots fans, where when we talked after wins, a month ago, for example, after the Jets win, everybody was like, yeah, well, it's the Jets, God, like, why are we winning these games? Like, they can barely beat the Jets, let's just tank the rest of the season and go for the draft pick if they have to squeak out a win against, the Jets. And I said, okay, but they're not going to do that, right? I know they're not going to tank. Bill Belichick's never going to tank. So how can they turn this around? Are they going to turn it around? That was sort of the narratives that I was going with, or the questions I was asking. Now that they've won 4 out of 5 and they blew the doors off the Chargers, all of a sudden people are starting to see, hey, it's not easy. They got to leapfrog a bunch of teams in the AFC still to get into the playoffs, but there is a path. And if they win out, then they might be able to make the postseason. They would be one of the hottest teams in the AFC going into the postseason.
Yep.
And you probably get into that conversation of that, nobody wants to play the Patriots type of situation is probably on the table again. So the narrative in Boston, I think, has definitely flipped from tank to now, okay, maybe this team is coming along and maybe they can be frisky.
Yeah, and I mentioned Miami because when you take a look at the schedules, Miami's the team. It has to be the team.
Yeah.
That the Patriots are looking at more than any other team.
They got a tough schedule.
Yeah, because really, if you look at it, the Dolphins are probably going to lose. Now they could win. They could upset the Chiefs. Chiefs didn't look good on Sunday night. They lost to the Raiders. I mean, Miami's won 7 of 8. They could upset the Chiefs. But if the Chiefs beat the Dolphins, which they're supposed to do, and New England wins this week on Thursday, we'll have another show on Friday, so 2 shows this week. All of a sudden, you go into next week's game and you beat and sweep the Dolphins. You are now ahead of the Dolphins. That's how quick it could happen.
Right, and I think that was the biggest thing that we talked about a lot, and when we talked about Patriots fans wanting to tank, is just that the football season is far from over, and a lot of things can happen really quickly. You look at all the percentages and all the probabilities of the Patriots making the playoffs; they're right around 20% right now by most kind of projections to make the postseason. But you look at last week; they were at about, I think, 10 or 11%, and they win one game and it goes from 11% to 20%, and they win another game and it goes from 20% to 30%.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And it can really just climb just with a couple of consecutive wins and a little bit of a winning streak and a good stretch of play. That sort of those probabilities that a few weeks ago were like, in the single digits, like 8% chance of making the postseason, that can flip really, really quickly. And I think that ultimately it'll probably be a little bit too little too late for the Patriots. Maybe they do sneak in as like the 6th or the 7th seed in the AFC, but you're going to look back at that 4-game losing streak and the COVID stretch that they went through, and the Kansas City game, certainly the Broncos game when Cam Newton came back from COVID, and the Houston game, that was a killer too. And just look at some of those losses that they could have won, and kind of scratch your head and be like, hey, if they had just punched it in at the one against Seattle, or if they had just finished the drive against the Broncos, or finish the drive against Buffalo, and they just kind of win 1 or 2 more of those games that went the other way for them, then we really would be talking. Maybe that 4-game losing streak, it's tough to overcome that type of a losing streak in a 16-game season.
And look, I still, because the AFC is tough. So I think some people think, all right, the AFC is so good, so you're going to have 10 wins. I just don't look at it that way. I look at it at the AFC is so good that you might have these teams beating each other.
Right.
And you might put yourself in a position, again, if the tiebreaker situation works out for the Patriots, that they could get in if they lose to the Rams on Thursday and then win their final 3. They could still get in that way because, again, we're just talking about them with the scenario with Miami, and there would still be 2 more games left. So we're getting ahead of ourselves by saying, hey, in week 15, they could be mathematically into the playoffs. That gives you 2 weeks of wiggle room. So you can lose Thursday's game, finish out winning the next 3. You'll still be in a great position with all your tiebreakers, and you still have a good chance to win. Obviously, I think if you win out, you're going to get into the playoffs. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I just don't think a 10-win team is not getting into the playoffs in
Especially
AFC with 7 teams.
Yeah. Right. That's the difference this year, is that they have that 7th seed. So it's kind of hard to imagine a 10-win team with 7 teams in the playoffs not making it. That 10-win teams usually make it in the 6 seed format, let alone a 7 seed format. So you would think that they would be able to squeak in that way. But, they do have some teams they have to leapfrog still. Baltimore, the Vegas Raiders, they have tiebreakers against both of those teams head to head, obviously. But they still need those teams to at least lose one more game to be able to leapfrog them. So Miami is a team in the playoffs that you look at, okay, that's a team they can catch that's already in, if the playoffs were to start today. But they do also need to get some favors from their other teams with Baltimore and the Raiders as well. And man, your Jets, they were so close. They were so close for us on Sunday, and then Greg Williams had to go and get himself fired. And this conversation's a lot different, really, when you start to consider if the Vegas Raiders had lost that game to the Jets. Now the Patriots, I believe, would have been the 9 seed technically, because Baltimore's playing tonight, and then Baltimore is in the whole COVID situation now, and we know how that is in New England. We could be looking at a situation where the Patriots officially finished week 13 as the 8th seed if the Jets had just not called a cover 0 blitz on that
yeah, well, that'll get you fired. Well, again, you look at here's one of the circumstances. Miami and Las Vegas will be playing each other.
Right.
Week 16.
Yeah, Miami's got Kansas City, they got the Patriots, they got the Raiders, and maybe the Bills. It's a tough schedule for Miami.
Yes, that's going to be tough for the Dolphins. That's why the Dolphins, they're going to have to do something like maybe upset the Chiefs to try to where you really believe, okay, they're going to do it. Not to say that they can't win. I still think they're a better team than Las Vegas. Las Vegas, and we know that. They had no right winning the game against the Jets. No right. I mean, they did not play well.
We also have to mention with Miami, before we get too ahead of ourselves, Hard Rock Stadium has been a house of horrors for Bill Belichick. That's been probably the one place where they lose the most games in the dynasty, maybe outside of Denver, in Denver and Mile High. They've been very bad in Hard Rock Stadium. They have a sub-500 record. Even with Brady against Miami in Miami. I think a lot of it, and maybe they get some help by spending the week out in LA this week in the warm weather, is that usually that in Miami game is either in September or December. So in September, it's 100 degrees down there, right? And then in December, it's 30 degrees up here in New England, and they go travel down to 80 degrees in Miami.
Like it's 100 degrees.
Right, and it's a big shift. So in that Miami Miracle game, if you remember, which Patriots fans won't want to remember, the first half, the Patriots blew them out. They blew the doors off the Dolphins. And then in the second half, I think the heat caught up to them a little bit, and the offense sort of sputtered, and that opened the door for Miami. So the weather changes actually have been a big factor for the Patriots going down to Miami in the past.
Yeah, and look, there's no question. We're just laying out the plan.
Right.
Not saying that the Patriots are going to beat Miami in 2 weeks, or that they're even going to win on Thursday, of course. But this is the plan. The plan is now open. It's available. The Patriots, even though it statistically doesn't say it, they kind of control their own destiny right now. They really do.
Yeah.
And see, Vegas has the easiest schedule outside of Tennessee and Indianapolis, because, again, you get to figure with their schedules, they're going to get it. They're good teams anyway. I don't care what happened to Tennessee against Cleveland. They're going to get into the playoffs. Vegas and Miami, those are the two teams really that the Patriots have to be dealing with. And Vegas' schedule is a little easier because they get the Chargers and Denver. But the Colts play the Raiders this week, and I would suspect the Colts would beat the Raiders. I'd be surprised if the Raiders beat the Colts in a big game for both teams needing to get to the playoffs. I just don't think the Raiders are a better team than the Colts. So, look, the best situation is you beat Miami next week. You have Miami beat Vegas, and now you've still got the tiebreaker with Miami, and now Vegas has come back to earth with back down to your level with a couple of losses. So
Baltimore's in there too.
Who's that?
Baltimore.
Yeah, I don't know if Baltimore's going to run the table though.
They got Cleveland and they got the Giants who are playing much better football
Yes,
now.
yes,
So maybe those are two teams that can trip them up. I also, I think Dallas is going to lose tonight to Baltimore, but with this COVID fog thing, that Baltimore's gone through, they haven't
yeah.
practiced a whole lot. The Steelers just lost to the Washington football team. I think
Seattle lost to the Giants, so you
right.
never know.
Yeah, you never know.
And I got to believe too that Cleveland, who has had their share of getting blown out by Baltimore and the way that they've been picked on by Pittsburgh and Baltimore, that they're salivating at playing the Ravens next week.
Yeah. Yeah, the Ravens are in a tough spot. And I know what it's like, from the Patriots' perspective, having gone through this already with New England, where it's not just the fact that, you might not have all your entire repertoire of players because of COVID. It's also the COVID fog after the fact,
Yes.
both physically, literally the COVID fog, but also just from a perspective of practice time and reps and, kind of people being athletes, being creatures of habit. That's a really big thing. And we saw, I don't know if it's going to be as bad for Lamar as it was for Cam, but we saw Cam go through COVID, miss a game that the Patriots lost to the Chiefs because their quarterbacks turned the ball over 4 times. And then he comes back from COVID and he's not the same guy.
Yep.
He really wasn't the same guy. And it wasn't necessarily, he said he kind of felt like he was moving slow a little bit out there, heavy, just because he was out of practice, out of sync. His lower body was not syncing up with his throws and he just kind of looked totally out of whack. So that's a big element of this for Baltimore is if Lamar and the guys that missed time due to COVID, if they're going to be able to continue to hit the ground running and be able to put out there a decent product. The Dallas Cowboys, they should beat them by 3 touchdowns. But with that COVID impact, you never know.
Yeah, and that's the thing because as you were saying, the NFL body, they're not used to taking a week off, 2 weeks off, and then coming back, and after having a heavy case of basically what is a strong case of the flu, and then having to come back and play football, they're just not used to it. So not only the missed practice, but your body, like you said. So yeah, and that's just one player we're talking about with Cam, and now you got a bunch of guys with Baltimore. So yeah, it's not looking. The Patriots went through it, and it's behind them now, hopefully. And if teams like Baltimore, maybe another team pops up that the Patriots are chasing, then all for the better. If you're a Patriot fan, hoping the team gets to the postseason, which you should, because it hasn't happened recently. We've gone through this spell, I don't know how many years, maybe 6, 7 years now, where number 1 seeds, number 2 seeds are winning Super Bowls. That was not the case for a long time. For about a 10-year stretch, we were seeing teams like Baltimore, the Giants, would make these runs from nowhere to barely getting in as a wild card or a weak division winner, and then going on to winning a Super Bowl championship. So it can, and if it's going to happen again, I could see this season, 2020, being the season it happens again.
Yeah, and I think the thing with the Patriots is that if you look at the top teams in the AFC that they might go up against, whether it's if they end up being the 7 seed, for example, and they go up against the 2 seed in the first round, and again, I know we're getting way ahead of ourselves, but just for argument's sake, if you play a team like Kansas City or Pittsburgh or Buffalo, who have great records, right, and have much better seasons so far on paper than the Patriots, the Patriots on paper at least match up pretty well against those teams.
Yes.
They're kind of built to play those types of teams. A team like Pittsburgh, for example, we saw in that wacky Wednesday night game against the Ravens. Everybody in the world knew that the Ravens only could run the football. That RG3 was their only way he was going to move the ball was but with his legs, and yet the Pittsburgh Steelers still couldn't stop read option, right? They still couldn't stop the option runs with RG3. Kansas City and Buffalo are pass happy teams that want to put it in the air, and the Patriots have a great secondary and a defense that's starting to come along in the front 7 as well to pressure the quarterback. So they are built to beat those 3 teams: Pittsburgh, Kansas City, and Buffalo. Now, if they get into a matchup with Tennessee or Cleveland, that might be a different story. But those 3 teams at the top of the AFC, the Pats built themselves personnel wise and now are building up to it in terms of what they put out on the field to be able to be really competitive against those types of teams. So that if you're Kansas City or Buffalo, the last thing you want is the Patriots to sneak in as a 6 or a 7 seed and end up having to play them in the first round of the playoffs, because the Patriots do have the ability to shut down those passing attacks. They have the secondary to do it.
And speaking of that secondary, they shut down the Chargers receivers Allen and Williams this week. They get Woods and Cup on Thursday, and that's going to be another key matchup. It's interesting. The Rams have top 10 units rushing and passing, but they're only 17th in points. And I think that squares solely on the quarterback. That's where the quarterback comes in. The quarterback has to make the big plays on third down, on key downs, to make sure the team gets in the end zone instead of settling for field goals or punting or whatever the case may be. And we know the last time that Jared Goff faced the Patriots in the Super Bowl. Now, Flores isn't here anymore, but Belichick is still the man. He's still the man. We talked about it last week going up against Justin Herbert. That should be a good matchup because any rookie quarterback or first young quarterback that takes on Belichick defense usually gets beat up. It's exactly what happened to Justin Herbert and the Chargers last week. And now it's Goff against the Patriots again. And you've got Flores and the style of defense that made him look really bad about 6 weeks ago. And as you've said repeatedly on this show, which of course is obviously true, is that Brian Flores is running the Bill Belichick defense. And this is the defense we're going to see against the Rams again on Thursday night.
Yeah, I would think so. Now, the Patriots, Brian Flores against the Chargers blitzed Justin Herbert 20 times. The Patriots only blitzed him 5 times. So they went with a pretty different, in terms of pass rush, a different game plan against the Chargers than Brian Flores and the Dolphins did. But what they did in the back end was really similar, which is just spinning the dial against a young quarterback, right? You show them 2 high safeties before the snap. You rotate into a post-safety coverage. You show them, that it's man, but it's actually zone. Different disguises and rotations and things like that make the quarterback just hold the ball for that extra tick, trying to decipher, okay, where are they all going? Where are they all falling into? And by doing that, the Patriots pass rush then was able to run those stunts up front, and they were able to get after the quarterback. So a great marriage between coverage and rush there. And if you go back to that Super Bowl, that was a really big part of it too, was just most of Sean McVay's, kind of nasty stuff, the great stuff that he does with the scheme, is marrying the play action passes with the running game, right? Everything looks the same.
Oh, when he runs play action. I don't care what their percentages are. They lie. It's like he runs play action whenever like 90% of the time. That's all he does is play action.
Right. So what they do a great job of is they run everything out of 11 personnel, 3 wide receiver for the most part, and they run everything in condensed in tight splits, which allows them to block really well in the running game and get that wide zone, outside zone game that they want to get going. And then they marry that outside zone with play action, right? And that's the tough part if you're a defense, is being able to kind of read and react to all that kind of stuff. So what did the Patriots do last time around in Super Bowl 53 is they were able to shut down that sequencing, the run game, play action sequencing, and force Jared Goff to become a traditional drop back passer, right? You get him into 2nd and long, you get him into 3rd and long, and now you can't play action, you can't motion, you can't, get all that smoke and mirrors. It doesn't matter anymore, right? You have to be able to just execute a drop back passing game, and he wasn't able to do that against the Patriots defense. So that's what they're going to try to do again, I'm sure, is 1st and 2nd down defense, which has been a problem for the Patriots all year long until recently. That needs to be the focus, is making sure that they get into obvious passing situations on 2nd and 3rd down so that they can do different things in the rush. They can do things in the back end to limit Jared Goff and force him into mistakes. So ultimately, I think you're going to see a combination of a couple of game plans from Belichick. I don't think it's going to be the same exact thing they did in the Super Bowl, because Belichick's smart enough to know that he can't just run out the same exact defense again and expect Sean McVay to just fall into the same traps. So I think they're going to be a little bit different than that. And my guess is that Kyle Duggar as sort of an overhang slot defender on the outside, forcing those runs back inside like we saw him do against Baltimore. I think that's going to be a little bit more where they go than maybe that full-on 6-1 one gapping front that they ran in Super Bowl 53. So I'm really fascinated to see that chess match again of, does Sean McVay throw anything different at Bill Belichick than what we're accustomed to seeing out of the Rams? Does Belichick kind of change the game plan from the Super Bowl and go with a different strategy against Jared Goff this time? That's going to be a sort of kind of the chess match that's going to go on between 2 really great coaches. But ultimately, I think the Patriots have their hands full with the Rams defense more so than their offense at this point.
Yeah. And by the way, I would also, I would guess that Belichick is definitely the first film he wants to take a look at is Miami's dominant defensive performance against the Rams earlier this year. It was interesting. The Dolphins had 2 sacks in the game, and in both sacks they forced a fumble that led to
Yeah.
touchdowns. So it wasn't like
Yeah.
they had 50 sacks, but they were timely sacks. And once again, if you just pressure Goff, as we've seen over his career, if you get him down several times and force him to be uncomfortable, he's going to turn the ball over. It's the type of quarterback he is.
Yeah, it's funny because in that Super Bowl, they didn't really run. They ran cover zero bluff blitzes, excuse me, where they show like they're going to bring the house, but they don't, right? They show it and then they back off of it. And then the Stephon Gilmore interception at the very end of the game, they finally brought it. They finally brought the house. And Goff just looked like, he looked completely like he just threw up a lollipop to Stephon Gilmore. He had no idea what to do, right? Because all game long, they're kind of crowding the line of scrimmage. They're showing like they might blitz and then they're fanning out of it, right? And they're dropping off into coverage. And then finally they timed it up perfectly to just call that at the exact right time. Flores, on the other hand, in Miami, he's just getting after the quarterback right now. He's just sending people up the field.
Well, he's got 2 great corners too, just like the Patriots.
Right. Yeah, he's just blitzing the crap out of everybody. So I don't know if the Patriots, they haven't been that blitz happy this year, comparatively speaking, like Flores has been. They did do that a lot against Kyler. They did run a couple of zero blitzes and stuff like that against Kyler, maybe a little bit more than what they've done in the past. But that was, I think, more designed to contain him with his scrambling ability. You put 6 guys in the rush, then you should be able to contain the quarterback, especially when a lot of those guys are defensive backs as well. So I think that was a big strategy to stop him from scrambling. Against Goff, I think they probably go with more of the Herbert strategy of playing coverage and trying to force Goff to kind of read it out and make the right decisions and fit the ball into tight windows and just count on the fact that he's not going to be able to do all that.
Well, one big edge that the Patriots are going to have is that still no Andrew Whitworth, and he's only the best lineman on the team.
Right.
Noteboom has done a decent job in pass protection, but he's not a very good run blocker. They've gone to Akers more. See, I think this is the one problem that I have with McVay's offense. I don't see the reason for him to be using 3 running backs the way that he does. I don't see it. I mean, okay, Akers is a nice little player. He's had his moments this year, but Henderson was around last year. He was the one that started this year. I thought he did fine. I don't understand why all of a sudden you take the game away from Henderson and give it to Akers. The juggling. I don't think it works very well. You know what they say. We always talk about it. If you have 3 running backs, that means you don't have one. Throw in the fact that you don't have Whitworth, your best run blocker, and I don't think that that's something the Patriots are probably going to have to worry about, even though, as you said, that's a must. You cannot allow Akers, who seems to be the number 1 guy right now, to do anything in the ground game. If you just like, hey, you stop the running game first of the Rams, you're going to beat the Rams.
Yeah, and that's what the strategy they used in the Super Bowl was that they knew if they allowed Gurley to run all over them, they were going to have a long night. But if they could stop the run, force Jared Goff to beat them, they were going to have a better and more success. But I think with the Rams rushing attack, the main thing is not necessarily the blocking anymore, because it's not the same offensive line that it was a couple of years ago. It's the scheming by McVay. A lot of misdirection, a lot of smoke and mirrors, a lot of jet motion, orbit motion, things that just trying to pull guys out of the box and confuse guys and figure it out that way. Now, the Patriots in Super Bowl 53, they dared the Rams to hand the ball off to the jet motion. They said, we don't think you're actually going to do it. Right? We think it's just smoke and mirrors. We just think it's just an acting job, or just a kind of facade that you're just running the jet motion across the formation to throw off the defense, but we're not going to react to it. So that was a big part of their game plan in the Super Bowl, was just if they hand off the jet motion once or twice, you live with the yards that you give up, but we're going to count on the fact that 90% of the time they don't actually hand the ball off to the guy in motion, and we can kind of just forget all about him. So if you watch the Patriots front 7 in that game, they don't even react to the motion. They just let it go. They just let it go right by. And that's really where Sean McVay is at his best, is motioning, creating huge rushing lanes by, really stretching out the defense horizontally and being able to create those, big holes by basically what is a lot of the time like kind of like a smoke and mirrors operation.
All right. Now, also, as you were mentioning, on the flip side, the big worry for New England could very well be the fact that Look, we know they want to run the football. They have to run the football. They just won a football
Yeah.
game where Cam Newton didn't even throw the ball for over 70 yards. So, and they won the game 45-0. So they want to run the ball. The Los Angeles Rams are a very good run defensive unit. Aaron Donald is there. That everything is up front. They don't have the greatest linebackers, but they have excellent defensive front, and they have 3 really good players in the secondary too. And it's not like the Patriots want to throw the ball. So it's going to be interesting to find out how the Patriots are going to muster up some offense when you can't imagine they're going to get much success in the passing game. So they are going to have to run the football. They're going to have to do that to be successful.
Yeah, I wrote about this today, just how Josh McDaniels against the Chargers, and I think, I'm sure you watched the game and saw that opening drive, and just how beautifully scripted that was. He is getting in his bag with the running game now, right? He's deep into the schemes with the running game because he realizes teams are going to put 8 in the box. They're going to walk their safeties up closer to the line of scrimmage. They're going to try to take away the run, but we still need to be able to run the football because we're not good enough at passing the ball to get into a situation where we're going to have Cam throw it 40 times. It's just not a sustainable way of offense for this Patriots team. So they need to be able to run the ball. So McDaniels got into the option game with Cam, speed option, zone read, that type of stuff. Then he got into some wildcat, which was interesting. Then he got into some RPO packages in the second quarter. And they just are throwing a lot of different schemes at teams where they can be an offense, a rushing offense that throws traditional runs at you, under center I formation, fullback in the backfield, trap schemes, power schemes, ISO with the fullback leading up through the hole. Then they can get into Cam offense, right? Cam running attack with read option plays and RPOs and speed options and quarterback designed runs. And it's just, I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to take back the numbers in the box. And they realize that, okay, they had a lot of success with the traditional runs, just Damian Harris up the middle on lead or up the middle on counter and trap schemes and stuff like that. And they had a ton of success running the ball between the tackles that way. So what did teams do? They started filling every single gap on the line of scrimmage and saying, you're not going to be able to run the ball on us like that anymore. So the Patriots have now gone into this Cam iteration of their playbook where they say, okay, we're going to have 7 blockers, then we're going to add a Cam into the running mix, and now it's 8-on-8 instead of 8-on-7. And that it's the running game in football is all numbers. It's all about just how many blockers do you have versus how many defenders are in the box. It's really just counting, right? And the Patriots have been able in this past week against the Chargers to get their running game going again by making the numbers even in the box by using Cam as a threat and using him as a weapon in the run game. So that's what I would probably guess they do a little bit against the Rams. And what they were really able to do, which was awesome against the Chargers, is they put Joey Bosa as the read man in a lot of those situations at the end of the line where he's reading it out. He's trying to stay kind of figure out, should I crash or should I go to the running back or whatever? And that was sort of slowed him down. They watched that tape against Buffalo where he just wrecked the game almost for the Bills. And they said, okay, instead of, letting him scream up the field and create havoc, we're going to put him in conflict the entire game and get him thinking, right? And slow him down by getting him thinking too much. And I think that they might have a similar plan in store for Aaron Donald where they just put him in conflict the entire game and try to just run him out of the play by just kind of confusing him and having Cam have options. If Aaron Donald crashes to the quarterback, you flip it out to the running back. If he crashes to the running back, you flip it to the quarterback, that sort of thing. And they also are very aggressive front in LA with the Rams, similar to the Chargers, where they want to get up the field. They're a vertical team. They want to get up the field. So draw plays, delay draws, things like that we saw on Sunday against the Chargers too a little bit, I think will be a factor. Whams, the Patriots love whams, where they let the guy through and they wham him with the fullback or the tight end and get the lineman up to the second level of the defense. So I think that they have to use that aggressiveness against them. Get Aaron Donald thinking so he's not moving as quickly like I did with Joey Bosa. And they're going to have to try to run the football. They're going to have to find a way. And I think that's where Josh McDaniels and the Patriots offensive staff, after the Cardinals game, they went back to the drawing board and they said, look, we need to find a way to run the football effectively. We can't just say, okay, the opponent's taking away their run, so we're just going to throw it 40 times.
Yeah, no. That only works against the Jets.
Right. They can't do that. So they did that. They tried that against Houston, and Cam threw for over 300 yards in the game, but they lost, right? Because it's just too inconsistent in the passing game. Too many, blown plays, too many negative plays, like the fourth down against Houston and stuff like that. It happens too often for them where they're 2 step forward and 1 step back. And that's just too much inconsistency when they become a really heavy passing team. So they have to find ways to run the ball. If teams are going to put 8 or 9 guys in the box, then they have to make sure the Cam's a factor so that they can have that sort of even number situation I was talking about. And that's what they did against the Chargers. So it'll be interesting to see how teams then kind of react to, okay, they really showed us a lot with Cam involved in the running game. How are we going to respond to that now?
And I think if you look at the situation with them being on the West Coast, having these back-to-back West Coast games, a real big advantage that you played a game that was pretty much over at halftime.
Yeah.
And that's going to help the wear and tear of the body and so forth. Speaking of injuries, though, the two players that I think that there was a couple of players that went out, Jones and Izzo, both with neck injuries. How are they? How do you?
So J.C. Jackson and Jonathan Jones were added to the injury report yesterday as limited participants with the new injuries from Sunday. Izzo was already on the injury report. Now he has multiple injuries instead of just one.
Yeah, it's one position you really can't afford to have injuries.
Yeah, J.C. Jackson is a knee issue. Jonathan Jones, I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what his problem is.
I think
those are two big. Neck. You're right. It's two big. Guys in that secondary, especially against a team like the Rams that are very wide receiver heavy and are going to try to spread the field on you quite a bit. You need to be able to match up against Woods, Kupp, and Reynolds, and the Patriots typically have the horses to do that. But if they're missing Jones or J.C. Jackson, then that could be a problem. Jason McCourty's been decent, kind of as the fourth corner, playing a little bit of safety, a little bit of corner, kind of a different sort of defensive back hybrid role because they don't, they have that top three is pretty solid. So maybe he just bumps inside and ends up taking the slot, but very interested to see how Bill Belichick deploys Stephon Gilmore in this game. Last week, he took some reps against Mike Williams too, but it was mostly Keenan Allen, and it was Stephon Gilmore, like it was against Arizona with DeAndre Hopkins, just one-on-one against the best receiver, and he was able to keep them down, and then that allows the Patriots with the other 10 guys on the field to scheme it up, right? To take Mike Williams out, to take Hunter Henry out, to take Austin Eckler out, to get after Justin Herbert. And if you have Gilmore there, it'll kind of allows you to kind of unlock their other 10 guys to do game plan oriented things, right? Bracketing guys or blitzing the quarterback or whatever the case may be. So where does Gilmore go? I would assume it's Robert Woods. I don't see Gilmore traveling into the slot with a guy like Cooper Kupp, who's going to spend most of the time inside. Maybe not, because you can kind of bracket Cooper Kupp inside easier because he is a slot guy versus a guy out on the boundary potentially. So I think Gilmore will be on an island against Robert Woods. They'll have some sort of schemed up way of stopping Cooper Kupp, the safeties with the slot corners probably closing the middle of the field, and figure it out that way. And then it's just kind of confusing Goff from there. And if you take Kupp away from Goff and you take the running game away, then now you're really talking.
Anybody else? What's the status on Edelman?
The situation with Edelman's interesting. I think at this point, he's definitely not going to play on Thursday. He would already have to be out of practice at this point, and to ramp it up in a short week seems unlikely. To me, it's not necessarily about the structural issue with the knee, because the knee is a chronic issue at this point, right? It's not going to go away. He's going to have it for the rest of his playing career. It's an arthritis type of problem, bone on bone. So that's going to be a problem for him for the rest of his career. The issue is being able to ramp him up to full speed and game speed in 4 weeks, right? That's not a whole lot of time to get him back out on the practice field and get him ready to go. So I don't know if it's very realistic at this point for Edelman to be able to come back, just because there's not a whole lot of time left to bring him back.
Interesting. Okay. Well, we'll see, because that would be a big addition if they do make the push to the postseason. Yeah. No question. Even though it wasn't like Edelman and Cam showed any sort of, they definitely didn't have the marriage that Brady had with Edelman. But still,
I think Edelman's in this part of his career, I think Edelman is more of like a super situational player, right? Where third down, fourth quarter, you need a drive,
Yeah, sure.
right? You need to be able to throw the football. Those are the types of situations that I think that you can put him on the field where he plays kind of 50-60% of the snaps. That's basically how they used Danny Amendola when he was here, was sort of as this like super sub, right? There's a guy that comes in situations where they're going to pass the ball and is able to get open one-on-one against the coverage. So if you can put it in a situation where the Patriots, let's say they have to go 3 wide and they have to throw the football to get back into a game or to lead a game-winning drive late or something like that, and you can replace N'Keal Harry with Julian Edelman
Yeah.
in a 3 wide receiver package, and you go Myers, Bird, Edelman, that's obviously a lot better than what they had before.
All right, Evan. So we'll talk to you on Friday after the Ram game. We'll see how that goes, and then it's on to the Miami Dolphins. So Patriots, Baltimore's today. So we'll definitely find out how that works into the playoff scenario for New England. And then it's New England on Thursday. That's it. We have 2 games before we talk again, but 2 very important games as far as the AFC playoff picture is concerned. Thanks as always. We'll talk to you in a few days.
Thanks, Craig.